Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the progressive movement. Okay, so this is going to really jump ahead and cover a lot of the information from chapter 21. And this is a time period in which a lot of Americans are interested in trying to perfect or improve America. They're looking at a lot of the problems of the 19th century, and they're seeing that big business is really making it challenging for America to run effectively. So there are several things that are going to happen. This is going to be a time period in which a lot of Americans are seeking to create more standardizations of factories, trying to help bust trusts up, make it possible for more Americans to reform society, protect consumers, protect immigrants, trying to show that unions aren't necessarily important at this time. However, one of the problems with progressives is that they're going to have a singular vision of what it means to be an American. So one of the problems that is entailed with that is that a lot of progressives are going to try to take people who have different cultures, different identities, and force them to fit into a box. Okay, so let's just go ahead and jump right in. Yeah. Okay, so progressive era from about 1890 until 1920 is a wide spectrum of middle and upper class Christian activists who sought to improve the nation and reform the moral fiber and ameliorate the problems of modern life. Modern life being the more industrial life, problems with people feeling like life really didn't have much meaning, that it was all determinist, it was all determined by people's genetics. Darwinism is really popular at this time, trying to point to the fact that work really doesn't have much meaning anymore either. If you work in a factory, you're doing the same task over and over and over ad nauseum, or if you are working as a clerk, you're just pushing papers all day, and it's really hard to see how those papers are impacting society at all. So there's this strong movement within American society where they're trying to actually fix society so that life has more meaning as well. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why they really feel called to pursue this. One of the things that's also radical about this time period is how activists, people who are working on the ground, grassroots activists, are going to be responsible for impacting local politicians, which is eventually going to work its way up to the presidency, and the president is going to become a much more modern, a much more active participant in everyday Americans' lives. During the Gilded Age and the Age of Machines, the president was concerned with only protecting business and protecting business interests at that. So, as a result, they didn't really care too much about what was going on with the people. They just were concerned with making sure that the machines of industry were running efficiently and effectively, and if they were, great, then no worries. But if they weren't, then they would have to step in and prevent workers or whatever from impacting business. But now presidents are going to be focusing more on the welfare of average Americans as well, and really starts off with the progressives. Okay, so progressive causes, many of them fought successfully for reforms such as women's suffrage. This is something that's been going on since the 1840s. But suffragettes are going to be really influential in pushing for a lot of progressive reforms as well. They're going to be responsible for pushing for the prohibition of alcohol, as you can see in this picture. Lips that touch alcohol or liquors shall not touch ours. They're all dressed up. And having a lot of fun with this picture, as you can see. Antitrust legislation, which is something that even the government is involved in from the beginning. Laws curtailing child labor, the creation of a national income tax, conservation of natural resources, and the popular election of senators. So this is something where one of the biggest discussions about the progressive era is, was this a good time? Was this a time that was more free, more democratic, or was this a period that was seen as reducing the rights and the democracy of people of different ethnicities, cultures, trying to force them into this box. Because why is the prohibition of alcohol such a problem? For a lot of people, they would say that this is something that a lot of workers do with their free time. Instead of taking care of their family, they're wasting their paychecks on alcohol. This leads to more domestic disturbances, which breaks down the family, which is something that we all want to take care of. Something we need to care about is the protection of the family. But one of the other things is that it's attacking cultures that aren't Protestant and American, in a sense. Many of the people who are coming over to the United States at this time to find work in factories come from Southern and Eastern Europe. And in those cultures, they're primarily Catholic or Jewish, and also they placed a high emphasis on bonding socially and culturally over alcohol as well. It's a more performative culture in which they'll go to the beer garden, have a couple beers, and that's the way that they're going to celebrate Sunday. They might go to this, or they might spend time with their family on the Sabbath, meet up with friends at the saloon or at the beer garden, and perform their culture that way. A lot of other Americans don't value this aspect of immigrant identity, so they're going to try to attack it and force them to conform to more Protestant American standards as well. Okay, but we can also say this is a more democratic period because of the conservation of natural resources, the popular election of senators. However, we can look at a lot of the other problems that happen during this period as we move along. However, before we do that, one of the things that's important is to back up and look at issues with populism as well. So if we look at the origins of the progressive movement, many historians have pointed to the populist movement of American farmers as the origins of progressivism. This was the first time where a group of people came together and tried to form grassroots organizations that took on big business. They're trying to create a political movement in which they're able to attack the railroads that are taking unfair advantage of them, and also the grain elevators in Wall Street. They're trying to reclaim their strength and hegemony as farmers. Okay, so the first movement is the Grange, and in one of the textbooks that we're reading, there's this nice section of text that I want to read. So, Great Plains farming had long been a risky venture. Between 1873 and 1877, terrible grasshopper infestations had consumed nearly half the Midwestern wheat crop. As production rose, prices fell. Wheat tumbled from $2.95 a bushel in 1866 to $1.06 in 1880. Farmers who had borrowed heavily to finance homesteads went bankrupt or barely survived. One struggling Minnesota farmer wrote the governor in 1874, "We can see nothing but starvation in the future if relief does not come." So this is something where the marketplaces are dictating the price of wheats, even though they're doing fine, even though they're having some good harvests. And even if they're having bad harvests, they're still not able to recoup their losses because of grasshopper infestations, production rising, marketplace not needing as much grain, things like that. So many of them joined what's known as the Grange, and membership soared to more than 1.5 million members. They offered information, emotional support, and fellowship. The Grange urged farmers to buy less and produce more in order to make our farms more self-sustaining. They tried to set up cash-only cooperative stores and grain storage elevators to cut out the middlemen. They're trying to remove all of the industrialists who are taking advantage of their of the fruit of their labor as well. So Grangers focused their wrath on railroads, which routinely gave discounts to large shippers, bribed state legislators, and charged higher rates for short runs than for long hauls. So many Granger laws were passed as well to help try to ease a lot of this pain as well. So yeah, as you can see, they sought to cut out the middlemen who profited heavily off of the farmers' work. Okay, I always really liked looking at this picture as well, because you can see that the farmer is central in all of American history from 1776 until the centennial, 1876. I feed you all is what the farmer is saying. The soldier I fight for all, the preacher I preach for all, the sailor I sail for all, the merchant I buy and sell for all, the physicist, I physic you all, the banker, I fleece you all, the Wall Street broker, I bull and bear for you all, for all, I carry for all, I plead for all, I rule for all. So the farmer is placing himself central in making sure that everything else in America can run because of what they do. So there's definitely this fact that farmers really feel like they are significant and important and are really binding together to try to improve society as well. So in the 1870s, after the grain started to fail because it's really hard to not buy with cash, or to buy only with cash when hardly anyone has cash at this time. So they're going to have to eventually become more political as well, because it's going to be impossible for them to successfully exist following all of the rules of the Grange. And so the Farmers Alliance was this party that began in Texas and really united the Midwest and the South as well over the issues of agricultural farm protests as well. So this was a movement that organized regionally and helped form the Populist Party as well. It reached out to millions of members all throughout the United States, and actually African Americans were able to form their own branch of this organization called the National Colored Farmers Alliance, which had 1.2 million members. So you can see that this alliance is growing rapidly throughout the Midwest, the Great Plains, and the Deep South as well. And it had the potential to form this biracial organization, or become a biracial movement as well. However, many of the Southerners, based off of their racism, didn't want to join with African Americans, which was this real shame and shock, because you can see how progressive and how forward-thinking a lot of these members were, based off of the fact that they felt like they were being taken advantage of by other bankers and industrialists, and now they're binding together and trying to take it to them as well. They're trying to break up these trusts through through this union. And so we see not only are they trying to form a biracial movement, but they're also able to have a lot of women in alliance leadership as well. And so many women were able to have a platform in which they could promote prohibitionist causes and help push for stronger female representation within these organizations as well. And so we see that they're doing a lot to create a stronger party known as the Populist Party, which is going to have a major impact as well. As you can see in 1892, the Populist Party, which is running against the Democratic and Republican candidates Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland, they're going to be able to take 9% of the popular vote, or 5% of the Electoral College. As you can see, Harrison was overwhelmingly defeated in this election. However, the Populists took a major chunk out of Benjamin Harrison's out of his platform. This is something where, it very well could have gone to the Democratic Cleveland, because you can see that a lot of these states in the Midwest would have gone either Democratic or Republican. This is a time of shifting political allegiances for certain. So, but many of the times this is really challenging to talk about, because many of the presidential candidates looked very similar as well, and are just debating over minor issues such as if there should be a gold or silver standard, things like that. So, and what they're going to do with tariffs, are they going to raise or lower tariffs? You want to have higher tariffs if you are producing agricultural goods. So the Democratic Cleveland probably was supporting higher tariffs, while Harrison would have wanted to lower tariffs to help support more of the industrialists and bankers in the North, to try to create more competition, more marketplaces as well. Okay, so in 1892, we see that the Populists are beginning to have a significant impact on these elections. By 1896, the Populists were co-opted by the Democratic Party, and really lost a lot of their vigor and their intensity and their identity as well. Once William Jennings Bryan became the major candidate for the Democratic Party, he had been pursuing all sorts of policies to help make life easier for farmers and agriculturalists. And yet William Jennings Bryan really pursue this idea of having free silver as well, which is make silver more available as a monetary unit. At this time, the United States is running on the gold standard. Gold is valuable, it's stable, but it's rare. So it's hard for farmers to have gold or anything like that. Most of them have to live off of credit and eventually go into debt as well. So the civil rights capture of the Democratic Party presented a dilemma to the populace. They too advocate free silver, but only as one reform among many. To back Bryan would be to abandon the broad populist program. Okay, and that's the major problem that many of the populists are dealing with, is that they want to support Bryan, but he's only focusing on silver, rather than on a lot of the other reforms that the Populist Party is trying to pursue or take care of. So this is, trying to challenge a lot of the agricultural, or trying to challenge a lot of the, trying to challenge a lot of the industrialists and bankers that were taking advantage of them. Yeah, they wanted to reduce tariffs, have a graduated income tax, allow for public ownership of the railroads to make it easier for the public to set the rates of the railroads, federal funding for irrigation research to make irrigation more available, a ban on land ownership by foreigners, so this is something where they get to be a little bit more nativist as well, and the free and unlimited coinage of silver. However, the Democrats are only going to support the free and unlimited coinage of silver, and that's one of the things that's going to really divide. That this is something where by dealing only with silver, it becomes such a narrow and specific problem that it's going to be impossible for Bryan to have, or to carry larger sway within the Democratic Party, or within the United States as well. So there really isn't that much appeal to him, and as a result, the presidential election is going to be a pretty good victory for the Republican William McKinley, and William Jennings Bryan is going to lose as a result. However, out of the Populist Party, we see that there are these challenges to the establishment already, and progressivism is really going to pick up from where they left off as well. Out of the Populist Party emerged a new ideal for how government should be run. Progressives pushed for a new system where the federal government would be active in protecting the lives of its people. Look at the fact that they wanted the railroads to be publicly owned, the fact that they wanted federal government to pay for research for irrigation. The populists believed that the federal government could do a lot more for them than what the progressives, or than what had been seen before. And so the progressives are going to pick up on this because they see that this is a swelling movement that's forming in the Midwest and the South. It really could pick up speed and momentum as it moved to either coast and was co-opted by one of the larger parties, or by a party such as the Republican Party as well. So progressives pushed for a new system where the federal government would be active in protecting the lives of its people. The 40 years since the Civil War, the major opinion among presidents was that the government which governs least governs best. And whichever one is governs least is the one that is supporting business. However, business appears to need to have regulations to support the farmers, to support the workers. People are going on strike, joining unions. There is this possibility for a lot of change to take place in the United States. And so the presidency needs to adapt to become more modern and more active in people's lives. Okay, and this is all going to start off with what the progressives are pushing for as well. So, however, progressives are going to make assertions about how to create the best society and how to serve everyone else as well. Okay. So these are, some of the major ideas that are going on at this time. As you can see, one of the big major problems at this time is that by the beginning of the progressive era, the top 1% own over 40% of the wealth in the United States. And this is going to come under attack as the wealth is going to be more gradually distributed among the people as well. Okay, so central features for progressivism is a response to industrialization and urbanization. Industrialization, because there are a lot of strikes that are forming, a lot of people are being injured and maimed on the job, unable to work and support their families. And cities at this time aren't these great places to be. It's not a place where a lot of things are happening. The reason people are in cities is because that's the only places where jobs are available. So they want to try to fix, and for the most part, cities are disgusting and filthy places. At the turn of the century, the major form of transportation was horse-drawn carriages or vehicles that were animal-powered. And so they really didn't have a great disposal service either. So when horses would die, they would be left out on the streets for weeks. Cities didn't have a lot of parks or places set aside for people to wander and meander through the beauty of nature. They were places that were filled with tenements and shacks and were these really unsightly areas that didn't have much going on for it other than the fact people could work there. And by the time they're able to develop rail cars and trolley cars that take people to and from the city, this is going to lead to more suburbanization, where people are able to leave the city, wealthy and middle class people are able to leave the city and go to the suburbs and leave all of the squalor in the inner city as well. Okay, so there can be a diversity of reform impulses at various levels of government. The urban level, trying to clean up cities, trying to create more standards of sanitation, trying to create more parks. It's going to be one of those major moments where they're going to try and make cities desirable places to live. They're going to try to reform society on the state level, trying to reorganize how people are able to influence politics, and on the national level as well, as we're going to see with the presidency. Okay? And so the language of progressivism really begins with the language of anti-monopoly. They want to make sure that the government is stepping in and cracking down on these monopolies, cracking down on these trusts that are taking advantage of workers, taking advantage of other businesses, setting prices, making it a very economically volatile climate for the most part. So they're going to try to crack down on monopolies, make this fairer, more egalitarian, allow people to have a chance to compete in society. So this is going to be one of the first languages that they adopt, which we saw in the 1890s. The language of social bonding and social cohesion. Sorry about the typo in cohesion. And this is really going to be focusing on the fact that society is going to try to come together, the fact that they're going to try to create a singular vision of what it means to be an American. A lot of people are going to reach out and try to extend the mantle of American citizenship to other white, Southern and Eastern European American or immigrants. But those people are going to have to adopt what it means to be an American as well. And finally, we're going to see that the language of efficiency and expertise isn't going to be focused solely in the factory, but it's going to be applied to experts who are going to create the best standards on how to run government, how to fix a lot of the problems that are plaguing society. So sociologists and other law experts and reformists are going to be responsible for creating a better America as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and this is just another recap of who the progressives were. They're middle-class professionals, youthful, about mid-30s by youthful, urban, mostly living in the cities, educated, went to college, Protestant, white-collar. These are middle-class people who have a specific idea of what it means to be a professional. Many of them are women reformers who are looking for the protection of women and children from exploitation. This is also going to be one of the first periods where they're expanding access to contraception and they're trying to make it possible for women to have control of their reproduction as well. I'm not sure if I have the slide in here, but there's this startling statistic that on average, women in 1800 were having, on average, 7 births during their lifetime. By 1900, the number is cut to 3. Okay, so over the course of a century, women are gaining access to their contraception, and for the most part, it's by abstaining from having sex, for the most part. Okay, and so many of these women are trying to gain access to more rights within society. They want to have an education. They want to be politically stable as well, or to have a voice in politics. They don't want to be viewed solely they want to be viewed solely as having value to society for their ability to reproduce. They want to be able to have value in society as workers, as politicians, as educators, things like that, okay? And so that's why Fighting for the Vote is so extraordinary, is because it's completely reshifting and challenging Americans' understandings of women's roles in society. Okay? And so labor reformers are going to look for industrial freedom / democracy, making industry more open to the people, to the actual workers, to have a conversation with their managers, to discuss what it means to control how often they work, have a say in how much they're compensated or paid, to try to push to reform their lives, trying to make industry more democratic. And finally, urban reformers and social scientists are going to, urban reformers or muckrakers, we'll look at a couple examples of that, but they are famous critics of society who are trying to fix a lot of the problems within society, and also trying to help reform the sanitation of a lot of issues. We'll look at Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, a passage from that. That's one of the best examples of that. And social scientists, sociologists are going to be experts who are going to look at society and try to figure out how can we improve conditions in cities? What is going on the community level? Okay. And so we're re-envisioning freedom. This point C is so important, about not freedom from, but freedom to, shifting from a negative to a positive view of freedom. Freedom to have old age pensions, workplace regulations, freedom to minimum wage laws, freedom to unemployment insurance, freedom to child labor laws, mothers' pensions, anti-sweatshop legislation, protective legislation, juvenile justice, and consumer protection. So a lot of freedoms to being protected from being harmed by your workplace or by the food or drugs you purchase. This is going to be something that's so radically different in the ways that government is going to be responsible for taking care of its citizens, for everyone who works, because this is going to lead to a more peaceful and a happier populace as well. They're not going to be happy with their work, but they know that as soon as they get to work, that they won't be injured if they're able to actually pass some of these laws successfully. Okay. And this is just an example of how quickly social legislation was passed, and how this became something that was just having the snowball effect, where it's building up momentum, building up steam, until it's in quite a few states. So by 1914, all but one state had child labor laws trying to protect children and creating the means and the possibility for them to receive an education. By 1914, 27 states had maximum hour laws for workers to prevent workers from making accidents on the job. 1916, 32 states provide workmen's compensation for injured workers. 1917, 39 states had protective legislation for women in the same year. 11 states had minimum wage laws for women. By the 1920s, 15 states had minimum wage laws. So people now know that there's going to be a standard for how much people can be compensated for their work. Okay, and this is a picture of some of the squalor in the cities. In 1890, Jacob Riis was this famous photographer who published this book called How the Other Half Lives. And he's trying to demonstrate how terrible a lot of conditions are in cities. So he points to tenement life to show how many people are living in a single a one-room tenement, to show how many beds are stacked on top of each other to support or to house 8 people, and a space that's the size of a lot of people's dorm rooms or bedrooms. And so this picture shows a dead horse and children playing by it. Just look at how unsanitary and how disgusting this situation is. Where are these children's parents? Why aren't they in school? If you are of this time period, you might be wondering, why aren't they working? Why are they just loitering around the streets that don't really have good sanitation or drainage or anything like that? So cities need to be reformed. They need to be fixed. Child reform needs to happen as well, so that children can do something productive with their lives and that their lives can be better as well. As you can see, this child is walking off from this other group, so no one really knows what's going on with these kids. Something else that's happening is that a lot of workers don't have or a lot of employers didn't set up regulations for fire escapes or anything like that. So the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was one of the deadliest workplace disasters in U.S. history. On March 15th, 1911, the fire, a lot of women were working in a shirtwaist factory, so there's a lot of cotton, a lot of cotton fiber in the air. There was a fire that broke out. It just set the building ablaze as well. I can't remember what floor they were working on, but I want to say that it was at least the 8th floor or something like that. And so many of them, instead of being burned alive, jumped out of the windows to their deaths. Their bosses had locked the fire escape, or had locked the exits, because they wanted to make sure that none of their workers left early. And so, as you can see, 146 garment workers, a majority of whom were women, died from this incident. Most of the victims were recent Italian Jewish immigrant women aged 14 to 23. So just a tragic, tragic incident that was heavily covered by the media and really pushed a lot of reformers on the state level to set up regulations for fire escapes and making sure that there is always an exit open and available for people to get out. And yeah, this is a picture from the time where they took a photo of the remains of some of the women who jumped out of that building. Okay, one of the other movements is, remember that picture of the horse and the children? Well, people are realizing that there's this reform philosophy known that cities don't have to be these utilitarian places that are only good for work, but that they can be these beautiful places that can have lovely parks and places of learning and knowledge, have museums, have more universities. Chicago, which hosted the World's Fair in the 1890s, created this white city to showcase the beauty of Chicago. And so this really demonstrates that cities can be these places of beauty and monumental grandeur as well. And so there's this reshifting in what cities can hold for a lot of people as well, and the potential of them as well. Temperance, as I said, made temperance reformers looked at alcohol as one of the greatest evils in society, that it divides families, it takes away money that's due to children and women. And so one of the most famous temperance crusaders was the Kansan Carrie Nation. Her famous move was she would enter a saloon with another group of people and drive a hatchet through the bar. She was this really imposing figure. She was about 6 feet 3 inches and probably weighed over 200 pounds. She would just drive hatchets and break down bars with a group of other people who promoted temperance. So remember, this is something we talked about, is that temperance was viewed as a way to help improve society, but it's also an attack on immigrant culture. Hull House was another area in which a lot of women had the ability to reform society. So Jane Addams established settlement houses, and Hull House is one of the most famous examples in which American middle-class women were able to help immigrants Americanize and assimilate into the American culture as well. So they would give them education classes, help them learn English, help them get settled with a job, make sure that they weren't in position to be swindled or screwed out of their money. And so this is something that was important for this time, is that there were people who were also trying to help Americanize and help people assimilate into society. Okay, yeah, we can see that this is one of the strikes that took place. Garment workers from all over the world. So even though a lot of garment workers came from different places, they were still able to overcome their language barriers and unite together to strike against unfair wages and long working hours as well. Okay, so regulating business. Despite the 8-hour movement that the American Federation of Labor was pushing for, the average worker still toiled 9.5 hours a day. Some southern textile mills required work days of 12 or 13 hours. And it was not just how long people are working as well, but the fact that there are still many occupations that are incredibly dangerous as well. So one typical year, 1907, 4,534 railroad workers and more than 3,000 miners had been killed in workplace accidents. So you can imagine that this is something where there's a lot of discontent over working in these occupations because of how hazardous they are. So something that's happening is that on the state level, Wisconsin Governor Robert La Follette sought to regulate railroads, mines, and other businesses, and he's going to turn to experts. Remember, this is one of those really important aspects of progressivism. The La Follette is going to set up a law library, consult experts on how to fix and regulate business. What is the impact of shortening work hours? How can we make mines safer? What do railroad workers need to have a better chance of survival as well? Okay, so this is something that is going to be really important for the survival of business and to prevent people from striking and slowing down the progress of the economy as well. We need to make sure that, or in their opinion, they needed to make sure that their workers stayed alive and that they were satisfied so they would keep working hard as well. Okay, now let's get this to the muckrakers as well. So we've been talking a lot about workers, cities, places where people are working, rights and regulations, all sorts of things like that. But now muckrakers are really going to be focusing on protecting the consumer. So Upton Sinclair wrote one of the most famous pieces of muckraking known as The Jungle, which is about the meatpacking industry in Chicago. It follows the life of this Lithuanian man who comes to the United States, gets married, gets a job in Chicago at a meatpacking plant, and he goes through all of these horrible conditions. Eventually his wife Elzbieta dies, and he's all alone because capitalism, Upton Sinclair was a socialist, because in his opinion capitalism ruined everything about this man's life. So here's an excerpt from The Jungle. And this is about how sausages are produced and what the meatpacking industry was like. It was only when the whole ham was spoiled that it came into the department of Elzbieta. Cut up by the 2,000 revolutions a minute flyers and mixed with half a ton of other meat, no odor that ever was in a ham could make any difference. There was never the least attention paid to what was cut up for sausage. There would come all the way back from Europe old sausage that it had been rejected, that was moldy and white. It would be dosed with borax and glycerin and dumped into the hoppers made over again for home consumption. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust, where the workers had tramped and spit uncounted billions of consumption germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip all over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dry dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poison bread out for them. They would die, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together. This is no fairy story and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. Yeah, it goes on about how unclean all of these places were as well. And so the famous story is that Theodore Roosevelt was reading The Jungle, and he got to this part, and he was eating his breakfast sausages as well, and dropped his sausage and spit out what else he was eating, and pursued a Pure Food and Drug Act and also a Meat Inspection Act as well. So now we can see how on the ground, on the grassroots level, and on the state level, and how these critics of society are finally able to make it to the president. And Theodore Roosevelt is significant. He was president from 1901 until 1909. He stepped in for William McKinley after McKinley was assassinated. And the reason why we say that he's the father of the modern presidency is that he became a vocal leader in America. Okay, so he was responsible for getting onto a bully pulpit, manipulating and influencing the media to gain people's attention by suggesting different reform plans and policies. He was much more active in being a public figure. He was known for his oratory, for his rhetoric. He was a very influential person who had a strong presence. So he was all about promoting legislation that benefited society rather than merely standing out of the way and helping business out by having this laissez-faire, leave it alone business strategy or policy. So he enacted the Pure Food and Drug Act. No longer could you buy flour and have it be 50% flour and 50% sawdust. No longer could you buy drugs that are supposed to help with headaches, but it's only opium. What was on the bottle or what was on the package truly had to be in the package or bottle. The Meat Inspection Act is going to try to prevent anything like what we read about in the jungle, trying to prevent spoiled meat from going out into the public. And he also passed conservation legislation. Overall, he wanted to protect the American people and make sure that future generations had a high quality of life. He sought to help out the greatest number of people with each of the decisions that he made, and not to only help out his political allies or any of his business partners. So you can see here, Roosevelt established the United States Forest Service, signed into law the creation of 5 national parks, and signed the 1906 Antiquities Act, under which he proclaimed 18 new U.S. national monuments. He also established the first 51 bird preserves. As you can see, he did a lot of things that set aside 230 million acres of land for future public use. Okay. And so under Roosevelt, he's building this regulatory state that is also not necessarily busting trusts, but regulating them more strictly. He's making sure that businesses are playing by the rules. So he's going to, as you can see, prohibit railroad rebates, increase the power of the interstate. What is the ICC again? The interstate. I want to make sure I get this right. So sorry about this. The Interstate Commerce Commission. So this is going to be something where the federal government is going to monitor what's going on over the interstates. And then this act forbade rate discrimination as well. So you couldn't charge one person a certain rate and not charge someone that same rate. You couldn't benefit one of your customers over another. Okay, the Hepburn Act is also going to continue to try to strengthen the Interstate Commerce Commission and set reasonable and non-discriminatory rates. There's going to be the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. So he's trying to regulate business and take a step into controlling what goes out to the public, making sure that the economy is more stable as well. And so, this is just reiterating the fact that the president from 1865 until 1900 was very inactive. From 1901 to 1920, the president is going to endorse and support acts for creating a better society. William Howard Taft, who followed in the footsteps of Roosevelt, was TR's vice president and close friend and ally. So, however, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but you probably have read more about this as well, or have seen this in some of the textbooks or other articles that you've read, that Theodore Roosevelt was a major imperialist. And the reason why he believed in imperialism is that he was trying to spread the American way of life to other peoples abroad. So this is something where we see another variant, or one of the troubling aspects of progressivism, is that it also supported imperialism. It meant going out abroad and forcing taking away people's rights to vote in their own nation's elections and forcing them to be governed by an American form of government, or to have people who are sympathetic to the United States rather than allowing people to elect governors who sought out their nation's best interests. So, William Howard Taft wasn't as much of an imperialist. However, he gained many enemies for failing to expand America's empire. Furthermore, he allowed the Secretary of the Interior, Richard Bollinger, to sell millions of acres of land in Alaska, Washington state to a coal company. So this is another example of how he's going against the conservationism of Theodore Roosevelt. And so he really upset TR with these moves because he was the person who was tapped by TR. He was supposed to continue on where TR had left off, and Theodore Roosevelt wanted to go on safari and wanted to go and travel the world. So he was traveling abroad and left the presidency to Taft. And once he saw that Taft was failing in a lot of these ways, Roosevelt ran against his former vice president in what's known as the Progressive Party, and the Republican Party split in two. This allowed the first Democrat since Grover Cleveland to serve as president. However, we can't say that Taft was strictly going against progressivism because, as you can see, he was leading to all sorts of regulation of safety in mines and railroads. He created the Children's Bureau to try to support anti-child labor laws. He supported the Keating-Owens Act, which I think this one, tried to combat child labor. He worked for an 8-hour day for government workers, and also employers' liability for work done on federal contracts, and then also endorsed the 16th Amendment, which is income tax, and the 17th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators. So he was responsible for a lot of legislation and amendments to be passed as well. Okay, so we can't say that he was completely anti-progressive. He actually did and accomplished a lot. However, Woodrow Wilson promoted this idea known as the New Freedom. TR, when he was running with the Progressive Party, promoted the New Nationalism. So Roosevelt said that Americans would be freer if you gave the nation more responsibilities and a greater role in their lives. Wilson, however, promoted the New Freedom, which said that Americans would have more freedom and be more satisfied as citizens if the government took a more limited role in their lives. Wilson won because the Republican Party was split by the Bull Moose or Progressive Party third-party candidates, and so Wilson ascended to the presidency. In it, he created the Federal Trade Commission, which was to break up monopolies more, try to regulate business more, make sure that there are fair trade deals going on between different corporations. Ensure that there are no unfair methods or deals, and this was one of the strongest laws put into practice for breaking up monopolies. So we have the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act. Now we have something that's really effective at monitoring interstate commerce. So this is something great that he's able to accomplish. Okay, this is just a nice way to look at this. Federal Trade Commission Act, Clayton Antitrust Act, Narcotics Act, which is building off of the Pure Food and Drug Act, making it preventing people from dosing or putting anything into narcotics that shouldn't be in there. Federal Farm Loan Act, making it easier for farmers to gain loans. Adamson Act and Workmen's Compensation Act. So 16th through 19th Amendments, all of these things were passed during the Progressive era. However, American progressivism is for the most part white, middle class, and racist for the most part. So there are going to be other people who are going to be able to pick up on this reformist tendencies, such as African American progressives. W.B. Du Bois demanded full racial equality, including equal education opportunities, and urged resistance to all forms of racism. The challenge, wrote Du Bois, was to find a way to be both a Negro and an American. Booker T. Washington at this time developed the Tuskegee Institute, wanted African Americans to have opportunities within society, but he believed that the United States can never truly be truly fully integrated, so African Americans would have to form their own niche in society. W.B. Du Bois, however, is looking for full racial equality, saying that America will become a better place if everyone has opportunities to change society. And Ida B. Wells is also going to be pushing for full racial equality because she was a journalist and progressive who led anti-lynching campaigns across America. Lynching was at an all-time high during the early 1900s up through 1940s. And so she's saying that African Americans truly won't be free from this prejudice and discrimination of vigilantism and essentially state-sanctioned murder through lynching until African Americans have full equality as well. So this is why equality is such an important issue for African Americans at this time. And for people in general. We don't need to just look at lynching, but just the fact that everyone deserves to live in a society without discrimination. So they're pushing for these anti-discrimination laws, though. And yeah, progressive opponents, like I said, this is what life was like, a typical New York beer garden, where you can see how many people are gathering together, that fathers bringing their children. This is a place where everyone is gathering together. And yeah, racism, this is something that I can't emphasize enough or highlight enough, is that there are race riots that are breaking out, especially in places like Atlanta and Georgia. African Americans began asserting their rights and organizing against racism. This challenge to the status quo led many white Southerners to reassert white supremacy in the Jim Crow South. And the Ku Klux Klan is also going to come back to prominence during this time. And so be sure to, you can check out this clip of Birth of a Nation as well, which is all about, so you can be sure to check out Birth of a Nation as well. I realize that, I probably couldn't really hear what I was saying, but it's all about why the Ku Klux Klan was good. And I'll show this additional brief PowerPoint. I want to really emphasize and highlight this point about white masculinity and trying to protect the South from the fear of African Americans. That's one of the things that's really influential at this time. So be sure to check out the rest of this clip. I'll be sure to post this lecture on D2L as well. Okay, let's see. Oh, goodness. Well, this is a bit of a conundrum. No, I don't want that. Sorry, everyone. We're so close to the end of the presentation. I feel bad that this isn't working right now. Okay, well, anyway, some of the other things that are happening is that